Welcome to the Digital Marketing Mentor. I'm your host, Danny Gavin, and together with industry leaders and marketing experts, we'll explore the meeting point of mentorship and marketing. We'll discover how these connections have affected careers, marketing strategies, and lives. Now get ready to get human. Hello, everyone. I'm Danny Gavin, founder of Optage, marketing professor, and the host of the Digital Marketing Mentor. Today, I'm super excited for a very special guest, Jamie Belinne, who's the Assistant Dean of Career and Industry Engagement at the University of Houston's Bauer College of Business, my alma mater. She's received many accolades in her career, from being recognized by the State Department as a Fulbright specialist to being a recipient of NACE's prestigious Professional Changemaker Award. She's also been quoted by the Wall Street Journal, Fortune, Bloomberg, and other major outlets. Today, we're going to discuss mentoring college students entering the early stages of their careers and a lot about mentorship in general. Jamie is an expert in this area and has even written a book about it, and I can't wait to talk about that as well. Jamie, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing, Danny?
I'm doing so well, and it's really, really nice to have you here. As a lot of my listeners know, Bauer College of Business is a really big part of my life, both as a student and as a professor. And, we've done different things together, and I know how much you have such a wealth of knowledge, and it's just very exciting to have you on the podcast today.
Well, thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Let's start with your educational background. Where did you go to school and what did you study?
So my undergraduate was at LSU in public relations because I thought I wanted to work with the public. And then I realized it was mostly a whole lot of writing back in those days, which was fine. But I was working in the Office of Public Relations, and part of my beat was the Career Center, and just fell in love with the work they were doing. And so they hired me as a grad assistant in the Career Counseling Center, and I got my master's in counseling, started it at LSU, and then I got hired into a full-time job at Tulane University doing career counseling. So I finished my master's at Loyola University, New Orleans there, moved to Texas in 92, and was perfectly content. And then COVID happened. And like and my kids moved out of the house at the same time COVID happened. So I'm like, now what do I do? So I started a PhD program, and I should be finishing my PhD in curriculum and instruction at Texas Tech this May.
I didn't know that. That's really, really exciting.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
How does U of H feel about you getting a degree from Texas Tech?
Well, they really don't get a vote in that matter. But it was funny. I love UH. I love UH. But I felt like this was something I needed to do that was mine. And I didn't want to merge these two parts of my life too closely. The dean was like, why don't you get a PhD in business? I'm like, because I live here every day. I'm much more interested in getting something totally different and outside of my normal daily life.
I love it. And, for me, education is so important. And at a point in time earlier in my life, I wanted to get a master's in education. Didn't happen, maybe in the future, but I love how you're going in that direction, right? Because you know a lot about business, but, just moving that extra step forward. And even like with everything that you do, like just to push yourself to continue becoming an expert and getting better at everything. It's really commendable.
Of course, I brought it all back together because my research area is on a lot of the programs that we're doing at Bauer.
What experiences, both inside and outside the classroom, do you think were most impactful in directing your path?
I do think in my early formative years, my work as a student worker, my internships, first jobs out of school, those early formative experiences where you don't know anything, and so you try a little bit of everything, are so important. And every time I have parents who have young people that are starting school and they're like, they need to pick a career. They don't know what they want to do. And I'm like, of course they don't know what they want to do. They have no idea who they are or what's out there. And before you tell them you just need to pick something, they really need to go out and experience as much of life as possible. And I'm not just talking about go travel the world for a year, although that's fun if you've got the resources, but more so volunteer and work part-time and try different experiences to start to see what feels right for me and what doesn't. And those early experiences of doing those jobs that, they're not earth-shattering, but they're learning experiences. Those were important to me.
And I feel like a university provides a lot of the opportunities for those experiences, but there's a certain amount that a student or a person needs to do on their own. So how do you find that balance? Like some people feel I go to university, everything should be given to me on a platter. Others are, no, like you've got to be responsible. You're an adult now. So how do you see that balance?
Well, I tell my students every year, if you go to class and you meet the academic requirements, we will give you a piece of paper that says you met all of our academic requirements for a degree. That's all. If you would like more than a piece of paper, you're going to have to do more than the academic requirements. And that's kind of the tipping point. So if you choose to do student organizations, then you will have a better network. If you choose to do recruiting events, then you will have more opportunities for jobs available to you. If you choose to do internships and case competitions and volunteering, you will have a broader skill set to present to employers and a better understanding of yourself. But if you choose to do none of those things, you'll have a wonderful piece of paper made on really good paper that says you earned the degree requirements for the college.
Yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. What's the right path?
Yeah.
Let's talk about mentorship. How would you define a mentor?
Really, a mentor is a person who understanding background knowledge beyond yours in some area that can help provide insight and perspective on your goals and your questions. I think it's useful to know that there's nobody out there that is brilliant in everything. It is kind of situational and unique to their little area. So what's fun is, and I always tell mentors that I'm working with, not only can you learn from the experiences and backgrounds of someone that has done work that you haven't, but they can learn from you and the life experience you have in the world that you are in. So it can be a very reciprocal thing. But yeah, people that have lived and seen stuff that you haven't that can contribute to your understanding of your goals and yourself.
And I imagine in the world of college and for young students, it's really important to have a mentor in their life.
Oh my gosh, yes. And it's funny how many people come into college with a picture in their head of what they think a field is or what they think a job is. And that picture just couldn't be further from the truth. And it's so important to have people that can tell you the truth. I actually talked to an alumnus today who was coming to participate in a panel in my class. And he said, when I was in your class years ago, I thought I wanted to be in accounting because I thought I knew what accounting was. And then I heard the supply chain panel and they talked about procurement, which I'd never even heard of. And I thought, that sounds amazing. And then he started talking to people in that field and learning more about it. And he's very happy working in procurement now.
So before we go deeper into the student world of mentoring, let's first talk about your mentors. Who has been some of the most influential mentors in your career?
I've had so many because it is, like I said, it's very situational. So early in my career, I had a lot of much older people that had already established credibility because that's what I struggled with in the beginning was that nobody wanted to listen to me. Nobody wanted to take me seriously. I was this 20-something tiny girl that I'd walk in the room and immediately be ignored and dismissed. I found some older, and at the time too, it was a long time ago, frankly, some older white men that would take me under their wing, not just as mentors, but as sponsors that would not only tell me, here's how you speak up to be heard, but also they would kind of open doors so people would listen to me. And it made all the difference in the world. Without them, I don't think I ever would have been able to grow in my career like I did.
I think the world has changed a lot since then. But at that time, were you frustrated or was it like, this is just how it works?
It was a little bit of both. And it was funny because, a few people used to laugh that you learn how to work that system. Like I would go into a meeting knowing that they thought I was dumb and useless. And so I couldn't come in and say, here's what I think we need to do. I had to say, I don't understand why we're doing that. It still doesn't make sense to me. Could you explain it to me one more time? I just don't see why we're doing this instead of this. I mean, I know you know more than I do, so I need you to help me understand. And I would have to kind of lean into their, preconceived notions about me just to get my agenda. But the rough part with that was people knew that if I was in a meeting, things got done. They didn't always realize that I was the one getting them done. So I got invited and I got included a lot, but it took a while for them to actually turn to me and say, what do you think?
But I think the best part is you didn't give up, right?
No, I didn't. And again, the mentoring is important. It's certainly gotten better for women. I think people of color still have a very similar struggle to what I went through. And I think it's so important to find people who've walked that road and can talk to you about how they've survived it and sponsor you and open doors for you, because it's useful every now and then to be reminded you're not crazy. You're not incompetent. You just need to hang in there, and you can't get angry and pitch a big fit about it because then they start to dismiss you too. It's a very delicate dance.
Yeah, it's really tough. Like you said, if you kind of know what to expect and know what's normal, what's not, sadly, what may be normal,
Yeah.
But at least if you know like what's the system, what you have to do, it's a lot easier to be able to navigate it.
The other tipping point where I really needed a lot of mentoring, and this again kind of gets back to being a woman, but when I had my first children and I made that transition from I'm a professional and I'm very focused on my career and I'm doing all this stuff to I'm a professional and I'm a mom. And you go through this period. I think every parent, whether you're a mom or a dad, I think in my era, it was more the moms. Now I think it's both parents. You really struggle with if I'm being a good employee, I'm probably not being a great mom. If I'm being a great mom, I'm probably not being the employee that I was before. And there's not enough to go around. And your expectations for yourself professionally, you have to kind of reassess how you see yourself as a professional and what does balance mean? And it really helps to have other people who've walked through that parenting role before to help you redefine yourself, redefine your role, balance things out to realize which things you can let go and you're still a great professional, which things you can let go and still be a great parent. It's useful to have that kind of mentoring as well, I think.
That is so timely because I actually have two women in my company who are actually pregnant and are about to take their maternity leave. Happens to be they're in the same department. So it's kind of like a funny joke that I think God is playing on me. But I'm very excited to be able to support them through this. But I think it's a great point. Like, so from an employer, how does an employer approach that, right? These two women are going to be coming back to work and yeah, they're going to have that struggle. How do you think an employer can help, people who've gone on maternity or paternity leave and coming back and facilitate just to help them go through that challenge and struggle?
My rule of thumb, because I've had a lot of young women in my office that have had children and come back, and I've had a lot of young men that have had kids too. I do think it's harder on the women because they have the physical changes as well and the hormonal shifts. And so you come back and usually just because of the way the world works, you may have 12 weeks that are protected by the federal government, but you may not get paid for those 12 weeks. So you may come back sooner than you want to. And frankly, before your sleep pattern has gotten back in whack again, and before your hormones have readjusted. And so it can be a very emotional time. You can have a lot of brain fog. Your decision making may not be as strong as it was before. Your response time to things may not be as good. Your critical thinking may be impaired. And so you're already feeling like, I think maybe I'm projecting. I feel like every new parent, especially if it's their first child, feels like, I'm no good at this because it's so overwhelming. But then you have that feeling and then you go back to work and think, and I don't think I'm good at this anymore either. And I think it's so important as an employer to really make room for that when they first come back and recognize that this is almost like a short-term disability kind of thing where you have to give people room and make some accommodation that they will return to the state they were before children. You need to give room for that, though, and recognize that if they're not exactly the way they were before, that's not a permanent situation. That's a temporary situation.
I appreciate that advice. And I'm programming it into my mind and making sure that create that situation when they do return. So you've been in the position of mentoring others for many years now through your different positions at U of H and obviously other areas. Do you take a different approach to mentoring those within your actual department versus, let's say, students you're working with soon who are going to graduate?
I mean, if you're in my actual department, it's a lot easier for me to do it because I understand exactly what you do, your strengths, your weaknesses, where you want to go, and how we can get you there. So I'm able to do more. For students and people outside my department, it puts more pressure on them to reach out to me and keep me informed and work with me. I have a vested interest in developing the people in my team, so I will chase them down. I've had some employees where I'm like, look, I just found out about this job. You need to apply for it. They're like, but I don't want to leave. I'm like, I know you don't want to leave. And I don't want you to leave because you're doing a bad job. I want you to leave because you're ready for this next stage. And this is what's right for you. And so I'll do that kind of thing with people on my team. But another person that's outside, unless they are talking to me regularly, I may or may not think to be that assertive with them. It may be whatever we're talking about, we'll deal with. And then we're done until I hear from them again. So and I do this too. I mean, if I want to be mentored, I make sure that they can't forget me. I kind of keep finding reasons to go to coffee and follow up and stay in touch so that they can't forget about me.
And being so busy, like that makes a bunch of sense. And it's funny because I think a lot of people feel that, oh, I'm bugging you if I'm going to reach out, but it's the opposite, right? Like I have so much that's going on in my life and I care about you, but it's kind of hard to make that space. So you got to follow back up and I'll be there for you when you're ready, but I can't chase after you.
Yeah. But follow back up purposefully. Don't send the random, just checking in. That is a nuisance. But if you're sending me, there's an article, or hey, I haven't seen you in months, let's meet for coffee. I mean, give me a reason to reach out. And then, yeah, it's good to hear from you. But even then, it has to be kind of measured. I mean, I've had a few people that wanted to talk every single week. I'm like, I can't, I can't. But every few months, by all means,
So let's get into what are your 3 keys to successful mentoring?
So I think the very first thing is to really listen. And when you've been out there and somebody comes to you and says, what do you think? The first thing you want to do is give advice and tell them what to do. But it's so important to sit back and listen because they are a unique individual and their goals and priorities may be very, very different from yours, even at that stage in your life. So listening is so important. And along those same lines, you need to be a safe place for them. So if they say something like, hey, I just had a baby and I came back to work and I don't think my brain works anymore. And I feel like I'm not as good as I used to be. You can't say, well, buck up, buttercup, life's hard. I mean, you have to be a safe place for them to say, I'm afraid, or I think I may fail, or what if this happens? In that line, I think when people are vulnerable like that with you, your gut instinct is to come in and save them. But the best thing you can really do is to sit back and say, well, how do you want to handle that? What do you think you ought to do? And have faith in them to work it through with you as a sounding board. And if they ask for advice, by all means, give it, but give them space and faith that they can do it. And then lastly, when they do get it done, even if you were there every step of the way and you helped them, they did it, and give them full credit. And through the years, I've worked with so many students, and it makes me uncomfortable, frankly, when they're like, thank you so much. You made this happen. And I'm like, no, I didn't. You made this happen. You could have chosen to be that student that met the academic requirements and then just got the piece of paper, but you chose to be the student that did everything that you could, and you made good things happen. All I did was let you know it was available. And so let them own their success.
It's very easy to be like, oh, and naturally people like to look at themselves and it's like, ooh, look what I did. But you're right. It's like wrapping up this wonderful present with a beautiful bow. And the way you do that is by letting them know, yeah, I was there, but really it was all you.
And I always say, I think one of the greatest blessings of my career is I get to be part of the journey, and it's so wonderful because young people that are making that move from high school to adulthood, and they're at that stage where they don't want to call their parents all the time, even though they don't really know what to do and they really need somebody to tell them, but they want to prove they're an adult. So we at the university get to be that person that's there at this incredibly meaningful time in their lives that they will say, what do you think? Or where can I go? And we get to watch it happen. But they definitely make it happen because we see the ones that don't make it happen. So yeah, they make it happen.
Along these lines, you mentioned it's important for students and other mentees to be able to own their success. Are there any particular questions or processes you go through yourself to make sure that you're just showing them the open doors, not necessarily opening it up for them?
That's a great question. I spend a lot more time asking them questions than I do answering them. And even to the point where they'll say, I don't know what to do about this. Instead of telling them what to do, I'll say, well, what have you tried so far? Or, well, what do you think you may want to do? Just spend a lot of time kind of pushing back because sometimes it's a case of this is new to them. And how do you break down the problem is something they've never done before. And so it's almost like being in a consulting role. If you go into a business as a consultant, you're not going to come and say, here's your problem, I'm going to fix it. You're going to spend a lot of time with that client understanding where they are, what they've tried, where they're going, what they're thinking about it. And same thing as a mentor, you're a consultant that's going to listen and help them work things through. And then they'll hit a point where like, well, here's where I got stuck. And you can say, well, did you try this already? Did you try this resource? And they may say, yeah, I already did. Or, oh, I didn't know that existed. But yeah, it's more about asking than it is about answering.
It sounds like you're a natural. But so would you say earlier on, did you give more answers and then you learned, oh, I can't do that? Or have you always just been insightful about this?
I don't know that I'm insightful. I was trained as a therapist in my master's, and I did work as a therapist briefly, so that helps. But I still struggle. I think everyone struggles. I can't wait to give the right answer. And I joke with my students when we talk about case interviews and consulting, from the time we're very young, we are programmed and trained to give the right answer quickly. And it's so much a part of us to give the right answer quickly that it's really hard to overcome that. It's hard with mentoring. It's hard with managing. It's the same thing with the people I manage. I have to pull back and not tell them how to do their jobs because that's a horrible way to stop innovation. And then the same thing with my kids. I have to pull back from telling them how they should live their lives. A, they don't want me to, but B, it's a surefire way to make them do something opposite. But it's a struggle to pull back from giving answers.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that because it is very hard. I guess it is programmed into us at an early age. So it's just so normal. I know in relationships in particular, especially in marriage,
Yes.
it's more about listening than giving answers. And that's something that I've got to work on all the time.
My husband and I have a joke where, one of us will say something, the other will say, do you want suggestions or support?
I'm learning to ask that question as well. We've spoken a little about students, but I'm sure you keep in touch with students who've graduated, like they're in their first job. Are there any particular strategies or things that you help, students when they're in the middle of their first job and it's that first time and opportunity for them?
I think the biggest thing that I see when I'm working with new professionals is, first of all, they had an image of work as being something like you would see on TV, and that's not how work happens. It's a lot of flawed individuals with a lot of flawed managers, and that doesn't mean that your company's dysfunctional. It means that you've got human beings involved. So a lot of time helping folks think through how do you have assertive yet respectful conversations? How do you bring something up with a manager or a coworker when things don't make sense or you feel like people aren't being fair to you? How do you talk about that appropriately? Because it's not a skill that we always teach, and then you're expected to just know how to do it. And the alternative is I'll see people that are just ready to quit their jobs. And that's usually what they call me. It's like, I'm going to quit my job. Or God forbid, they already have quit their job. And you hear why. And it's like, all right, yeah, your manager isn't being very nice or your coworker's not being very nice. And this isn't the last time that's going to happen to you. So let's talk about how to handle that. So that's a lot of it does kind of focus on how do you have those difficult conversations.
All right, let's dive now into college recruiting. Obviously, people go through university, college. It itself can be difficult or hard. Stepping into the workforce or having that first job interview, there can be a lot of nerves. So what advice do you give to people who seem to get in their own way just because they're so nervous?
I'm a big fan of practice. If you can do mock interviews and either with a career counselor or a trusted friend who's also a professional, a mentor, they can say, let's walk through this. Let's walk through this. And you can usually guess at what the interview questions are going to be just based on the job description. But practice really does make perfect. I mean, you wouldn't get up to deliver a play without practicing. And an interview is kind of this performance that you should practice. And, you certainly don't memorize a script, but you need to know your stories well enough that you pull the right story and you can tell it very quickly. You need to understand, why you've done what you've done and why you want to go there next and be able to explain that. And practice really helps with that. And the funny thing is the people that are most nervous tend to avoid the practice the most because the practice is scary. And I've had to tell a few people because like, oh, a mock interview is just too stressful. I'd rather just do the real interview. I'm like, you really think the mock interview is going to be worse than the real one? Because I think you may be wrong.
It's like avoiding the inevitable. Not a good idea. Having those stories in your bank, so important, right? Yeah. I know when I'm interviewing people, if they can pull up stories and examples and they don't have to think about it, like it's key.
Yeah. And honestly, the trick is you look at the job description, you see the skills that they're looking for, and you come up with one story for every one of those things they're looking for and practice that story and you're ready for the interview because they're going to ask about that stuff.
High chance, right? Good chance. So many of the positions available to the younger workforce didn't even exist 20 years ago or even 10, right? So how do you coach the students to even know what types of positions they should look for and be open to, as flexibility, especially these days, will also be key, remote work environment, and new career types are developing every year. So how do you instruct your students?
I am a huge fan of informational interviews. So you find somebody that's in a job that sounds like it might be cool or interesting, and you reach out to them. And honestly, if you reach out to someone and say, your job sounds so cool, I'd love to learn more about it, they're usually happy to talk to you unless they're like the CEO and they're really busy. And then when you're asking them about the job, how'd you get into it? What do you do? What do you like? What do you not like? Ask them what other jobs are like this in your company and how are they the same? How are they different? And they can start to tell you about things you never knew existed that you could say, ooh, could I talk to that person? I'd like to find out about what they do too. But it really is important to just find out about as many jobs as possible because, like you said, it's a moving target. but there's some fun stuff happening. And the people that are aware and going after them are having a good time.
It's crazy how our world is changing every minute.
Yes.
So the only way you're going to find out what a job looks like now is if you actually ask someone.
Yes.
So you note that many employment failures are rooted in poor or miscommunication. What tools or skills do you encourage in your students to help avoid this?
There's actually two books that I like, Crucial Conversations and Difficult Conversations. I love both of those. I'm a certified Crucial Conversations trainer, but I honestly love both of those books. It's a skill just like any other skill. And we assume that everyone can have these awkward, uncomfortable conversations naturally, but it's not natural. Nothing about those conversations is natural. Our deep down programming is to go into fight or flight when there's some kind of awkward, uncomfortable situation, which is either one of those is the worst thing you can do. To actually stay with that discomfort and work through it in a way that is both assertive and respectful is a skill that takes practice. And so I do feel like the more you're putting yourself out there into situations that are just a little uncomfortable and a little outside of your depth, the more opportunity you'll have to practice working through that effectively and seeing what works and what doesn't work so that by the time it really matters later in your career, you've gotten pretty good at it. Alternatively, everyone should get a counseling degree.
I would imagine a lot of your time as the assistant dean is spent having discussions with leaders on the industry side of things and see what they want out of the next generation of employees. How do you get those leaders to give you real meat and potatoes insight that can be truly actionable to the college?
They have no problem giving us insight and feedback. They're very quick to say, we want this and this and this and this. And the bigger challenge is kind of separating what are the types of things that we should be doing in a university environment versus the type of things that should be training in the company's organization. So that's a bigger one. But in terms of the big picture stuff, there's some consistent themes we're hearing from all of them. And one is that persuasive interpersonal skill set, being able to speak persuasively, because that's one thing that ChatGPT and AI, they can't do that. And it's going to be a long time before they can. So the human beings who've got that selling skill, basically, regardless of your field, you don't have to be in sales to need the selling skill. Accounting, finance, supply chain, everybody needs it. But the people that have that are much more successful and they move up more quickly. So that's one side. The other side is that ability to tell a story from data. So the computers are really good at creating data and saying this data says this about this data, and then you can make more data. But then the computer goes, ta-da, and walks away. And the human being has to be able to look at all of this data and say, ooh, based on this, we need to think differently, or we need to act differently, or we need to ask the computer some new questions to find better insights. But that ability to really understand data, tell stories with it, and that ability to talk persuasively with other people, that can't be outsourced to computers yet. It's something that it's harder to send it overseas because you need those client relationships for it to be meaningful. And so if you want to have growth and success, at least in the near term, those two broad areas are what I'm hearing again and again from computers. Now, with that, there's some specific skill sets, like I'm hearing Power BI and Tableau over and over again with that storytelling kind of thing. And then experience working with customer service at some point so you understand how to work with difficult people. But broadly, that's what I'm hearing from everyone.
Thank you for sharing those. Those are really great insights. I would imagine that the hiring managers and other industry pros will also tell you of success stories they've had hiring someone or maybe adjusting their leadership style based on your advice. Do you have any examples or stories that you can share?
I've also worked with some senior leaders, and the two things that I do the most with them that seems to have the most impact for them. One is when you've been working your way up in an organization, you move up because you're so good at your job and you're so productive with your job. And then there's this tipping point where you get moved into a senior leadership position where they want you to basically stop doing all the things you've been rewarded for and focus on developing other people to be successful at it. And that's a real difficult transition for a lot of people. And so helping people to let go of their own performance and outcomes and focus more on the performance and outcomes of the people that they're working with has been a big area of mentoring for me for senior people. And it tends to be one of the most impactful for them because once they realize You don't have to do the work. And I know you feel like, but if I stop, what's my value? Your value is all these other people are becoming more successful because of you. So that's a big shift for people.
Yeah, I think I see that even in my own organization, right? Especially like in these analyst roles, like, you've been doing the work for so long. And suddenly as you move up, some people, success means becoming a manager. But when they become the manager, it's like, ooh, is this really what I want? I'm not supposed to actually do the work anymore.
Yeah. And then it's really hard because the second thing I'm always having to work with them is you have to let go because they're going to do it differently from how you will. You've got much more experience. So you're always like, but this way's better. I would do it like this, and this is much better. You have to let go of all of that and allow them to fall down and allow them to recover and within boundaries. And that's hard.
About a year and a half ago, I was struggling with just way too much work and everything. And I hired a COO and she helped me transition. But, for me, delegation was so hard because when you look at someone else, there's no way that they're going to be able to do it the same way as you. So what I had to do was come to terms that, okay, if I give it to them, I know it's only going to be 80% of what I would do. But you know what? That's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And you'll see, Danny, like let go. And I did that and it actually worked. And it's been tremendous for me.
Yeah. It's hard though.
It's very hard, even now.
Yeah.
All right, let's now talk about your book, The Care and Feeding of Your Young Employee, A Manager's Guide to Millennials and Gen Z. And I just want to say that when I got a copy of your book, the first thing I did was give it to my mom. And I'm like, Mom, you've got to read this because you need to understand what's going on here. But yeah, she loved it. The management of Gen Z and millennials has been a common complaint and discussion point for basically as long as they've been around, right, in the workforce. What drove you to write and publish this amazing book?
I'm so glad you asked. So I've been in some form of career services or recruiting for 30 years now. And I listen to the employers complain about Gen X, and I listened to the complaint about millennials, and I listened to the complaint about Gen Z, and the complaints were very similar. And so I really wanted to measure, are they really that different? And what I found was a lot of stuff isn't. A lot of stuff is a factor of being young, especially the thing about they're so entitled and they're not willing to pay their dues. And I'm like, that's really a perception issue. We forget how we were when we were young. And so we have these rose-colored glasses of our awesomeness that we actually developed into over time. Those are functions of youth. There were things that were different, and it was based on the world that they grew up in, shaping their worldview to be slightly different from the generations before them, which again was not a bad thing because it actually made them more adapted to the future that we're going into than the previous generations. And so while there are many things the younger generations can learn from the older generations, there are things the older generations can learn from the younger generation. And they try. It's so cute when they try and they mean well, because they know they have a problem and they know they need to do better. And they are making progress. They really are, especially when there's just not much change in the people. When you see a lot more change in the people, it's easier to have culture change. But when you've got leaders that have been there for decades, culture change is a tough one. And the other one that I'll see in companies, because I'll have companies that'll bring me in to work on inclusion and things like that. And what's always funny to me is like, we want you to come in and do some training on inclusion. And I'm like, who's going to be there? And it's always like, well, the line and staff. I'm like, what about the leaders? Oh, no, they don't need to come. I'm like, nothing's going to change if they're not there, right?
Was there anything in particular about your research for this book that you really enjoyed or found especially surprising and interesting that you really didn't know? Outside, you did just mention about the concept that all youth are basically the same, but any other interesting points or insights?
I think the thing that was fun that I like to point out to people was and this has been consistent over years and years of surveying them, what are you looking for in your next employer? And I give them a long list of things to choose from and they choose their top 3. But at the bottom of the list, every single time was workplace that values diversity. And everyone's like, but they're so into diversity in this generation. I'm like, yes, they are. So I did some focus groups and I'm like, tell me more. And what they said was, well, you're going to get that. Everyone values diversity. And so my takeaway was they're a bit sheltered because living online where diversity is the norm and inclusion is the norm, when you go into a company, it may or may not be the norm. And so what happens is they're assuming that that's a baseline expectation of their company, that there will be a embracing, not just respect for diversity and inclusion, but embracing diversity and inclusion. And when that doesn't happen, it rocks their world. It's funny because I've had companies I was working with get upset because they had young employees that were on a campaign to have gender neutral bathrooms and pronouns and email signatures and all that. They're like, we don't even have anybody in our organization that is non-binary. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not actually the point. Their point is we want to be welcoming and inclusive enough that if somebody appears, we don't react to that. We've already made it safe for them. And so it's that kind of mindset that honestly, it's freaking out a lot of the older guard, but it's the future. And they are going to lead us into the future. But it was funny to me that they don't realize that their leadership is needed there. They figure we've already got it figured out.
I find that so fascinating, right? That it's so normal.
Yeah.
You're so used to it, but then you come into an organization and it's just not there. I mean, that shock is like
Yes.
frightening, right?
The other thing that they assume is that they can be a whole person at work because they're told that. And the companies speak a really good line about we're all about wellness and inclusion and taking you as you are. This younger generation is very, very comfortable talking about mental health in the same way that previous generations would talk about their dental health. I mean, it's, kind of gross to bring it up at lunch, but it's not a secret. The rest of the world's not ready for it quite yet. And I've had students that when they were asked about obstacles that they've overcome would talk about dealing with depression and how they overcame depression. And then they wouldn't get the offer and they wouldn't know why. And I'd call the company and they're like, yeah, that's oversharing. And I'd go back to the student. They're like, but why? I've overcome it. This was a huge thing. I'm like, you're there and the world will get there, but the world's not there.
It reminds me of something that happened like a week ago. One of my employees came to me and they said to me, I would like to go start seeing my therapist again an hour a week. So the first thing that I react is like, oh my gosh, is there a problem? Like, are you okay? Is everything all right? And I asked that, obviously in a respectful way, but it was like, yeah, Danny, there's nothing wrong. It's just, this is something that's part of my life. I'm actually in a really good space right now. And I would like to do that because I think it will help me better. So how can we work? So the question was just, how can I work that with my hours? And obviously I was very flexible and not a problem. But it's interesting how as soon as I heard that word therapist, it's like, is there a problem? But no, it doesn't have to be a problem. So
it's like going to a personal trainer. I go to a personal trainer once a month and I go to a therapist twice a month. And this is how I take care of my wellness.
So powerful. I hope people hear that.
Yeah. And again, they are leading us into the future. It's where we're going, but we're not 100% there yet.
We'll get there. Hopefully.
Yeah.
So not to make you hype your book up on the spot, but so many of the reviews of your book say something along the lines of, this should be required reading for all leaders. The review also mentions how actionable the advice in your book is. It's clear the readers and yourself see this book as truly valuable for helping both ends of the workforce. Is there anything you want to do to get your book in front of more leaders?
Yeah, I've been really fortunate that typically every company that I go into just buys one for everybody. I guess knowing my own style of reading business books, just to tell people something, I put a summary at the end of every chapter for people that don't want to actually read the chapter. So you can go straight to the summary and then decide if you want to read the rest of it to have proof of what I'm saying. But I think if you're frustrated with young people and you're thinking, what on earth is going to happen to us? It's a good way to feel better and feel hopeful and have not only some context for why things are different, but some suggestions and strategies for how do you leverage this.
Were there any tricks you used to help you balance the line between seemingly potentially being like defensive younger workers versus explaining how managers and leaders can help avoid or conquer generational challenges?
Humor. I think the more we can laugh at ourselves, the better. So usually when I'll come into work with a company, first I'll spend a lot of time where we just laugh at each of our generations in a way that's non-judgmental, but just embracing the silliness of our youths and the things that were normal when we were young and the language we used and the things that we thought were important. And when you start kind of with that foundation and then you go to the next stage, and then I go specifically to, here's what we're saying, but let's put it in context. If we have time, I can give you an example. We talk about how narcissistic this generation is with the selfies, everything. I'm taking pictures of myself all the time and they're so full of themselves. And I always going to say, all right, when y'all were younger, depending on the size of your town, my guess is many of you hung out at the mall if you lived in a city. Or if you were in a smaller town, maybe you had that one drag by a Sonic or whatever where everybody kind of cruised. Or if you're in a really small town like mine, there was that one cow field that the farmer never checked, and you would just go have a pasture party and wait till somebody said, hey guys, watch this. And then you knew it was going to be a fun night. But we had these moments where we would gather and we would say and do things, and our friends would react to the things we said and did. And based on these interactions, we would start to shape our views of ourselves and the world around us. And this was a normal developmental part of growing up. For a generation that was born into technology, where communication happened with the device before it was verbal, I could use the iPhone before I could speak. So in this case, communication through the device, I have an experience, I take a picture, I post it online, people react and I interact. I have another experience, I take a picture, I post it online, people react. And based on these reactions, I start to shape my view of myself and how I want to be in the world. The difference is there's so much more feedback. And some of that's bad. There's a lot of credible research showing that this trolling and things like that are leading to depression and suicide, and that's a very real thing that needs to be dealt with. At the same time, for previous generations, those people you hung out with at the mall or whatever probably were people that went to your school, lived in your neighborhood, that were very similar to you. And so these interactions could become a cultural echo chamber. But for the youngest generation online, you're getting feedback from people of all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of experiences, and you become much more aware of the fact that your views, your words have different impact on different people, which has caused them to be much more inclusive in their thinking and their communication very naturally than previous generations, which gets back to that idea of they seem like they're narcissistic because they're taking selfies, but they're actually much more aware of the people around them than previous generations because of this experience. And so we look a lot at the misperceptions and we put it in the context of the world that they grew up in and realize they're not bad. They're just different.
I love that perspective. Exactly like a cup half full or half empty. Both are true, both are there. But man, there's a lot of good there. There's a lot of exciting thing about this generation and all that they see and view. All right, it's time for Jamie's top 3. For those who don't know, Jamie enjoys birding or bird watching, and I'd like to do a double top 3. Why don't you tell me the top 3 places you like to do bird watching here in Texas, or it could be anywhere in the US? And I'd also like to know the top 3 birds that you like to look out for.
Quintana Beach. During migrations, it's got this tiny little place that you can walk and the trees are all low so you can see. I love to go to High Island because they've got this raised walkway that's in the treetop so you can see everything really well. And then Padre Island, because that's where everybody comes in right off migration. They're tired, they're beautiful, and they sit right in front of you because I'm too tired to run away. So that's nice. Those are my 3 favorites. For 3 favorite birds, I don't know if I could. I absolutely love them all. But I will say, and most people don't realize it, that we have more migratory birds going through Texas than anywhere else in the U.S. And we don't always realize just how gorgeous they are. Painted buntings, if you've not seen them, they live all over Texas and they just look like somebody sneezed a color palette over a bird. They're just gorgeous. Those are lovely. Roseate spoonbills, which are easy to see all around Houston, which are like the Texas flamingos, I like to think. And then, gosh, any of the warblers that come through. Gotta love them all.
Before we wrap up, what is your next big thing that you're working on, next big project outside of your PhD? Because I'm sure that is a big project.
It is. I'm having so much fun with my PhD. Next chapter of my life, I'm really looking at young women and their understanding of their bodies. And so I'm toying with the idea of writing a book in that area. And I'm also getting involved with some nonprofits in the Houston area that help with education for young women to better understand their bodies and how to make healthy decisions, because it's one of those areas that somehow we've made it not okay to talk about. And I think it does need to be okay to talk about it, because we don't have communication and education, then we make bad choices.
I love that. And if I may ask, why specifically that area?
I have a daughter who's 20, and I found that I was always, to this day, I was always the mom that my daughter's going to be going, okay, so I have this friend, and it will legitimately be that she had this friend that couldn't talk to her own mother, but needed honest, accurate information. And there's so much misinformation out there. Again, we've made women's bodies dirty. And because of that, we can't talk about it. And because of that, we make bad choices. And so, and I'm not judging choices. I'm saying we're not making informed choices. And so I really feel strongly that our young women need safe places to ask questions, to get honest, accurate information, because there's not enough out there. And, it's funny because I talked about all the women in my office that have had babies. I would have so many frank, in-depth, graphic conversations about pregnancy, childbirth, after childbirth, because sometimes they came from cultures where even their own mothers wouldn't talk about these things. But I'm like, but if you don't know, then you feel frightened and alone and you don't know how to deal with it. And I feel like there used to be a community of women where we were all, stuck in the cave together and there was no hiding anything and there was open conversation. And over time, we've turned these conversations secret and uncomfortable. And I want to address that because I'm all about, whether it be through careers or whatever, people need to make informed choices about their lives so that they can feel good about what they're doing. Even if they're going in a direction that's like, wow, I don't like this choice. Okay, great. Let's figure out how you got here so you can make a different choice, but it needs to be informed.
That's amazing. And I can't wait to see your book because you should write one.
Thank you.
So Jamie, where can listeners learn more about you and your initiatives?
I don't self-promote much. I have my own website, jamiebelinne.com, and it talks a little bit about the different things that I do. And that's really probably the best place.
That's perfect. All right. Well, thank you, Jamie, so much for being a guest on the Digital Marketing Mentor. This has been so insightful. And I know that whoever listens to this is going to have to take out their notepad because there's a lot of good information here.
Oh, you're sweet. Thank you.
Of course, thanks, listeners, for tuning into the Digital Marketing Mentor. We can't wait to speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to the Digital Marketing Mentor podcast. Be sure to check us out online at thedmmentor.com and at the DM Mentor on Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts for more marketing mentor magic. See you next time.